I'm in the forests of coastal California, which just happens to be where I was this morning when I came up with a brilliant idea. I've suddenly put things all together and invented my own philosophy. You know, a philosophy like objectivism and pragmatism and existentialism and Catholicism. I've just invented my own ism, and it's brilliant. It explains everything. It gives your life meaning. It tells you what to do in times of trouble. And it's really very simple. My new ism, are you ready for this? My new ism is called triagism. Get it? We're in the trees, and my new philosophy is triagism. Only triagism really isn't related to trees. It's based on the word triage, which is not a word we use very often. You might see it in medicine is mainly where it's used. But once you understand how it's used in medicine, you might be able to see how it can be applied as the basis for a personal philosophy. So what is triage in medicine? Well, it refers to the sorting of patients according to needs and resources. The place you might see it nowadays is in a big city emergency room. You go into the emergency room, the first desk you come to is called the triage station, where a triage nurse will decide right away where your case is going to go. For example, you come into the emergency room and you're full of bullet holes and you're gushing blood, the triage nurse is going to send you right into the emergency room. If you come in with a cold, a headache, a stuffy nose, the triage nurse is going to send you over there to the bench to wait for a couple of hours. That's the sorting process of triage. And it's kind of benign in an emergency room because everyone gets treated eventually. It's a lot more serious on some place like a battlefield where there's a lot of wounded soldiers and only a few medical resources. So let's say you have 100 wounded soldiers and only 2 doctors and resources to treat only about 10 soldiers. So the problem of triage there is which of those 100 soldiers is going to be treated. So I'm saying that all of life is a triage process. That in fact you're doing the same thing that the triage nurse does. You have a limited amount of resources and you have to decide how best to use those resources. It's not really applicable as much to the emergency room as it is to the battlefield, because there you're facing life and death decisions. If you've got 100 soldiers and resources to treat only 10 of those soldiers, who do you treat and who do you leave alone? And that's the key issue. So no matter what you might be doing in life, if you want to feed the hungry, if you want to have fun, if you want to do anything at all, you're dealing with the fact that you have only limited resources and virtually unlimited possibilities for using those resources. So there are probably 1 billion hungry people in the world, and if you want to feed some of them, you have to decide which of them to feed, and that too is a triage decision. So I'm trying to tell you that all of life is a process of triage, a process of sorting, and triagism is trying to organize and quantify that. So let's just answer that question before we go on. You've got 100 wounded soldiers on the battlefield, and you've got resources, medical resources, to treat only 10 of those soldiers. Which of those soldiers are you going to treat? Well, first of all, some soldiers aren't wounded very badly. They've got surface wounds, they've got a little bit of bleeding, they're kind of bandaged up. They're going to live even if you never see them, even if you do nothing for them. So there's no sense in wasting your resources on those because they're going to live anyway. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got gravely wounded soldiers, people who have limbs blown off, who are gushing blood, who are clearly on the edge of death. The impulse is to rush to those soldiers because they're so badly off, but that's not the triage decision. The triage decision is how much resources are we going to spend on these people and how likely is it to succeed. And with those gravely wounded soldiers, they're probably going to die no matter what you do. So you don't want to spend your resources on them. You just got to let them go and let them die. And you have to focus on the middle level of patients, the people who are going to respond to the limited resources you can devote toward them and who you're going to get the most benefit from, who are going to get the most benefit from the resources you can give them. You can spend hours in the operating room with a patient that's going to die anyway, or you can spend a few minutes with people just to push them over the edge to save their lives. So you want to focus your resources on that middle level of patient where your resources have the maximum impact. And that's what it is throughout all of life. You have lots of things you could do if you're traveling. You want to go to the places where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck within the limited time you have to travel. Triage can apply to everything. You don't want to waste your resources on something that has no impact, and you don't want to waste your resources on something that would do just fine without you. You have to focus on that middle level where you're getting the most for your resources. Now, triage isn't the only way you could sort patients coming into a battlefield hospital. Another way you could do it is first come, first served, where the first 10 wounded soldiers that arrive at your hospital, you let them in, and then you close the gates and you don't let anyone else in. Well, that works in a sense, but it's not achieving the goal. You are actually killing people by doing that because you're locking out some cases on the outside that you could handle better. So let's say using triage, you can save the lives of 8 people that might have died otherwise. First in, first come, first served, you would save maybe 3 people that might have died otherwise. So you're killing 5 people by using that method. Another method is to let everybody into the hospital. So everybody's needs are great, so you let everyone into the hospital. The hospital gets overwhelmed with patients, all of them crying for attention, and nobody gets saved. So triage, where you look, you look at the big picture and you look at which of these 100 patients you can do the most good for, and taking them out of the population and putting them into your hospital, that's where you're doing the greatest good. You're saving the most lives. My contention is that this process of sorting needs and pointing your resources where they can do the most good applies to everything. Every activity you engage in. There's nothing that's exempt from this triage process. I don't know what you want to do with life, but whatever it is, you need to apply triage to it, because inevitably there are far more things that need your resources than resources you have. So this is true of anywhere in the world, anything in the world. There are greater needs than your resources, so you have to carefully parcel out these resources to get the most bang for your buck with them. Triage can be hard to get your head around because it's usually contrary to the popular wisdom. The popular wisdom on anything is that everything must be done. For example, if someone is sick, anyone who is sick must be treated. Every soldier who is injured must be saved. Every must-see attraction must be seen. If you're going traveling, everything must be done. And triage is saying the opposite. No, you just don't have the resources in anything. You never have the resources to do everything, so you have to carefully select where you put your resources. If you go traveling overseas to, say, Europe, and you have 2 weeks to see all of Europe, the fact is you can't see it all. And even though the guidebook is saying you must see this, 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 and all these things, you can't go by the guidebook because that's giving you too much to do. You have to decide what you should use your very limited time for. And that would be true in everything. So you can't listen to the conventional wisdom. Triage requires that you be able to discount the conventional wisdom, and that essentially you have to be willing to kill people. You have to be willing to sacrifice worthy avenues that you could have pursued because they're not the most efficient use of your resources. So what does triage entail? What does it require? Well, first of all, you have to have clear goals. You have to have something that you want to achieve. And in the battlefield example, that's very simple. We want to save as many patients as possible. We want to save as many lives as possible. Once you have this clear goal, the second part is that you have to be looking at the big picture. You can't just be looking at the individual soldiers that you see in front of you. You have to stand back and look at the things from a global perspective, look at all of the 100 soldiers you're faced with, and you have to see what is the whole picture here? What is the whole spectrum of needs here? So you have to, it's like you're seeing your problem from an aerial perspective. Once you have that, then you have to be willing to make the hard decisions to reject worthy options. So I'm not saying that any of those 100 soldiers don't deserve to live. They all deserve to live, and they've all got families, and they all should be saved. Nonetheless, you have to reject some of them. You have to be willing to reject these worthy options. And so many people have trouble with this. They have trouble saying no. And I have trouble saying no. It's a difficult thing to do when you see somebody in front of you who has obvious needs and you deliberately decide not to help them. That's a brutal thing to do, but you have to do it if you're going to get the most from your resources and help the most people in the long run. Finally, triage entails people hating you. You have to realize if you execute triage in the right way, people are going to hate you. Somebody has to decide on that battlefield who gets into the hospital and who's going to live and die. And the people who happen to be on the losing end of that decision are going to hate that person. So triage, you don't get into triage as a popularity contest. You have to realize that you're going to reject options, you're going to say no to people, and those people you say no to are going to be very unhappy. So you have to have to engage in triage and to engage in my philosophy of triagism. You have to be willing to disappoint people, because in the long run you need to do that to get the most from what you have to offer. So that's just the starting point, the general outline of where my new philosophy is based, how it works. And hopefully in future videos I'll be able to flesh this out and give you some more specifics. All I really want to do here is give you a set of tools, a toolbox that you can use in your own life, some practical ways of thinking about things that you might be able to use in your own life. I call this a philosophy, but I'm really not trying to compete with those European guys, with the beards and who are always pontificating about whether reality is real and what is meaning, and because reality is real enough for me, and that's part of my triage philosophy, that this reality that I see in front of me, it's good enough. So it's a place that I can do stuff, so it's good enough. I'm not going to get into details of what is real and what is not real. I just want to give you some tools. So subscribe to this channel, tune in. I have a lot of other kinds of videos, but hopefully I'll come back to this concept of triagism, and you can always comment on my videos and see if there's something I have overlooked, and we'll see what we can make out of this.